My name is Amelia Carter, and at 36 years old, I thought I had a firm grasp on the concepts of duty, honor, and family. I'm a major in the United States Army, a career I chose to follow in the footsteps of the greatest man I've ever known, my father, Sergeant Major Thomas Carter. I never imagined that his death would become the battlefield for the most profound fight of my life, or that the uniform he was so proud to see me wear would be the very thing that allowed me to deliver the sweetest, most silent, and most definitive victory over the woman who tried to erase his legacy, and my part in it. It's a strange thing when the rules and regulations you live by, the very bedrock of a life of discipline, suddenly align to deliver a form of justice so perfect it feels like a miracle. But before I dive into the story of how my father's own service record became my silent weapon, I want to say hello to everyone watching. Let me know where you're from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, or had to fight to honor a loved one the right way, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps to know you're not alone. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to join a community of people who understand that sometimes the family you choose and the family you serve with are the ones who truly have your back. The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day so painfully ordinary that its memory feels like a betrayal. I was in my office at Fort Huachuca, reviewing personnel files, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of computer servers. The name on my screen was Brenda, my stepmother. My heart didn't leap with warmth. It tightened with a familiar, weary caution. Our relationship, if one could call it that, had been a long, cold war of attrition, fought over the territory of my father's affection. She had been his wife for 15 years, and for 15 years, she had viewed me as a relic of a life she'd rather forget. "Amelia," she said, her voice thin and brittle, devoid of its usual syrupy condescension. That was the first alarm bell. "Brenda, is everything okay?" A pause, filled with a sound that could have been a sniffle, or just a sharp intake of air. "It's your father," she said. "He's gone." The world didn't stop, the computers didn't stop humming, the fluorescent lights didn't flicker, but inside me, a great engine seized. Gone. The word was too small, too neat for a man like my father. Thomas Carter wasn't a man who just went. He was a man who occupied space, who filled rooms with his booming laugh and the sheer force of his presence. He was a sergeant major, a titan carved from granite and grit, a man who had faced down threats in places I only read about in intelligence briefings. "A heart attack," she said. "In his sleep, peaceful." The words were meant to be a comfort, but they felt like a lie. There was nothing peaceful about the violent crater his absence ripped open in my chest. I don't remember the rest of the call, just the logistical shrapnel. I was on the first flight out to Georgia the next morning. The flight was a blur of canned air, and the sympathetic, pitying looks from flight attendants, who saw the raw grief on my face. All I could think about were his hands. Big calloused hands that could break down and reassemble a rifle in the dark, but could also be so gentle, teaching me how to tie my first set of bootlaces. His knuckles brushing mine. He'd made me practice 100 times, until the loops were perfect and tight. "A soldier's life can depend on a good knot, Amy," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. I was 7. My father was my North Star. My mother had passed away from cancer when I was 12, a quiet, fading tragedy that had left my father and me adrift in a sea of shared sorrow. We'd clung to each other, two parts of a whole. He never treated me like a fragile piece of glass. He treated me like a future soldier. He taught me how to read a map, how to find due north by the sun, how to be resilient. "The world will try to knock you down, kiddo," he'd tell me, cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table. "Your job is to get up one more time than you get hit." Then when I was in college, he met Brenda at a local charity auction. She was a real estate agent, polished and manicured, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was everything my mother wasn't, and at first I was happy for him. He deserved a companion, someone to fill the quiet evenings. But from the beginning, Brenda treated me with a cool surgical precision, excising me from their life together. It started small. My high school photos on the mantelpiece were replaced with glossy pictures of her and my dad on cruises. Phone calls with him would be cut short by her voice in the background. "Tom, dinner's ready," her tone leaving no room for argument. The real friction began when I announced I was joining the army. My father was incandescent with pride. His eyes, the same clear blue as mine, welled up as he looked at me on my commissioning day. He was the one who pinned my gold bars on my shoulders. His hands, those strong, steady hands, fumbling for just a moment with the tiny clasps. "You're carrying on a legacy, Amelia," he'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Make me proud." Brenda, on the other hand, saw it as a personal affront. "I just don't understand why you'd want to do something so unfeminine," she'd said at the celebration dinner, picking at a salad. "All that shouting and mud. Tom, you should have talked her out of it." My father had just shaken his head. "Brenda, you don't understand. This is the best day of my life." Her smile tightened, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. She didn't just dislike his past. She was jealous of it. She was jealous of the bond it had forged between us, a bond she could never penetrate. My uniform was a symbol of everything she wasn't a part of. Arriving at the house I grew up in was surreal. Brenda had completely remade it in her image. The walls were a sterile beige, the comfortable, worn furniture replaced with stiff, modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine, not a home. The most jarring change was the den. It had been my father's sanctuary. The walls covered with plaques, commendations, framed photos of him and his men, a shadow box with his medals. It was all gone, replaced by a large, bland, abstract painting in shades of gray and taupe. I felt a surge of nausea. It was like she had started burying him long before his heart gave out. "Oh, Amelia, you're here," Brenda said, greeting me at the door. She was dressed in a chic black dress, her makeup perfect. She looked more like she was hosting a somber business luncheon than mourning her husband. "Yin." She accepted my awkward hug with a stiff pat on my back. Where's all of Dad's stuff?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, gesturing towards the den. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that old clutter, it's all packed up in the attic." Tom agreed it was time to modernize. He was so tired of living in the past. I knew that was a lie. My father cherished those memories. He would sit in that room for hours, telling me stories about the men in the photos, about the operations behind the medals. Each object was a chapter of his life, a life Brenda had packed away in a dusty attic. In the days that followed, a cold, quiet war began. I tried to talk to her about the funeral arrangements. "I'm handling it, Amelia," she'd say, her eyes fixed on her phone as she scrolled through catering options. "I'd like to help," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I can call the VA. They can provide a flag, maybe an honor guard." She finally looked at me, her expression one of profound irritation. "Absolutely not. I will not have this turned into some sort of military circus. Your father was retired. He was done with all that nonsense. This is going to be a quiet, dignified service for family and our friends." Her emphasis on "our" was a deliberate sting. "But Brenda, it was his life." I pleaded. "It was who he was. He's a veteran. He's entitled to it. It's entitled to it. He would have wanted it." "You think you know what he wanted?" she snapped, her voice finally losing its composure. "You were never here, Amelia. You were off in Germany, or Korea, or God knows where else, playing soldier. I was the one here. I was the one who took him to his doctor's appointments. I was the one who held his hand when he was in pain. I knew the man he was at the end of his life, not the ghost you worshipped from afar. The funeral will be the way I want it." Each word was a precision strike, aimed at my deepest insecurities. She was right. I hadn't been there. My career, the very thing he was so proud of, had kept me away. Guilt, sharp and acidic, flooded my throat. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just clinging to a version of him that no longer existed. Defeated, I retreated. I asked only one more thing. Can I speak at the service? A eulogy. I need to say something. This, I thought, was a reasonable request. A daughter's right. Brenda gave me a long, cold look. She picked up her phone and tapped on the screen. I've already arranged the speakers. Our pastor will speak, of course. My brother David will say a few words about Tom as a brother-in-law, and I will be giving the main eulogy. It's all taken care of. But I'm his daughter. The words came out small, pathetic. Amelia, she said, her voice dripping with false pity. The program is full. We want to keep it brief. It's just, you won't be needed. You won't be needed. The phrase echoed in the sterile, silent house. It was the culmination of 15 years of being pushed to the periphery, of being treated like an inconvenience. She hadn't just shut me out of the arrangements. She had declared me irrelevant to my own father's memory. I went upstairs to the guest room, the room that used to be mine, and closed the door. The grief I had been holding back with military discipline finally broke through my defenses. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, in the house that no longer felt like home. And I wept. I wept for my father, for the stories I'd never hear again, for the legacy she was trying to bury in a quiet civilian ceremony. And I wept for myself, the daughter who wasn't needed. In that moment of profound despair, I felt a failure not just as a daughter, but as a soldier. I had let her win. I had let her dishonor him. The next 2 days were a hollow, agonizing stretch of time. I felt like a ghost in my own childhood home, drifting through rooms that held no trace of the man who had raised me. Brenda was a whirlwind of brisk efficiency, fielding calls, finalizing arrangements, and accepting condolences with a practiced, somber grace that made my skin crawl. Her family, her brother David and his wife, her sister, flocked to the house, forming a protective barrier around her. They spoke to me in hushed, sympathetic tones, treating me like a distant, tragic relative, rather than the daughter of the man they were supposedly there to mourn. Their conversations were about property values, golf handicaps, and who was bringing what to the reception. My father was a footnote. I tried to find solace in memories, but the house itself felt hostile to them. I went up to the attic, a place I hadn't been in years. It was stiflingly hot and smelled of dust and old wood. In the corner, stacked carelessly, were the boxes, labeled Tom's Army Stuff in Brenda's neat, looping script. I pried open the lid of the top box. There it was, the plaque from the 101st Airborne Division, the photo of him, laughing with his platoon in the dusty haze of Kuwait. His old, worn patrol cap, the fabric softened with years of sweat and sun. I picked it up and held it, pressing it to my face, trying to find a trace of him, of his scent, of anything. All I could smell was mothballs. Brenda hadn't just packed it away, she had tried to chemically neutralize it, to erase every last trace of the life he lived before her. A cold, hard anger began to crystallize around the raw core of my grief. This wasn't about her wanting a quiet service. This was an act of erasure. That evening, I called my mentor, Colonel James Wallace, retired. He had served with my father back in the 90s and had been a constant source of guidance throughout my own career. He was a gruff, no-nonsense man with a heart of gold, and he'd known my father as well as anyone. I told him everything, my voice cracking as I recounted Brenda's words. You won't be needed. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him perfectly, sitting in his leather armchair, his brow furrowed. That woman, he finally growled, the words a low rumble of thunder, is a piece of work. Tom Carter was a soldier to his bones. A quiet civilian service is an insult. It's a damn desecration. I know, sir, I said, my voice thick. But she's the widow. She has control over everything. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm failing him. You don't fail, Carter, he snapped, his voice firm, the old command authority ringing through. You reassess. You find a new angle of attack. Now listen to me. Legally, she is the next of kin, and she directs the disposition of remains. That's a fact. But your father was a sergeant major with over 30 years of service. He is entitled to full military funeral honors. It's not something she can just veto if the request comes from the right place. But who would request it? She's made it clear she won't. The Army, Amelia, he said, a new energy in his voice. The Army takes care of its own. It's not just a saying. Who was his last duty station before he retired? Fort Benning, I said. He was with a training brigade there for his last 2 years. Good. That's your point of entry. There's a casualty assistance center on every major post. Their entire job is to handle this stuff. They can coordinate with the funeral home, provide the honor guard, the bugler, the whole 9 yards. They can't force her to change the location or the time. But they can damn well ensure the United States Army is represented when one of its finest is laid to rest. A tiny flicker of hope ignited within me. Do you really think it would work? It's worth a shot. What's the worst that can happen? She says no, and you're back where you started. Make the call, Major. Do it for your dad. Hanging up the phone, I felt a shift inside me. The despair was still there, a heavy cloak on my shoulders. But now it was joined by something else, purpose, a mission. For the first time in days, I felt like a soldier again. The next morning, I waited until Brenda and her brother had left to go to the funeral home to finalize the details. I found a quiet corner in the sterile living room and made the call to the Fort Benning Casualty Assistance Office. My heart was pounding. It felt clandestine, like a betrayal of the fragile, hostile peace in the house. But Colonel Wallace's words echoed in my head. Do it for your dad. A calm, professional voice answered the phone. I explained who I was, my rank, and that my father, retired Sergeant Major Thomas Carter, had passed away. I explained that he was entitled to funeral honors, and that I, his daughter, was requesting them on behalf of his legacy. The man on the other end, a chief warrant officer, was immediately sympathetic and professional. Of course, Major Carter. We'd be honored to provide the final salute for the Sergeant Major. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'll just need some information to pull up his records. Can you confirm his social security number for me? I gave him the number, my voice steady. There was the sound of typing. Okay. I have his file right here, the warrant officer said. Sergeant Major Thomas Carter, retired out of the 198th Infantry Brigade. A damn fine NCO. I remember him. He was a legend around here. Okay. I see the funeral home information you provided. We'll make the call and coordinate the honors detail. A 7-person team, 6 pallbearers, and an NCO in charge. A firing party and a bugler for taps. And of course, a folded flag, to be presented to the next of kin. Thank you, I breathed, relief washing over me. Thank you so much. It was happening. She couldn't stop this. Just one moment, ma'am, the warrant officer said, his voice thoughtful. I'm looking through his final service record here, just to make sure all the paperwork is in order for the flag presentation. That's interesting. What is it? I asked. A knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. A problem? A hiccup? It's his last OER, he said, referring to the officer evaluation report. The NCO equivalent being an NCOER. He must have misspoke in the moment. No, wait. My apologies. His last NCOER and command assignment. According to this, his final rater, his last commanding officer, before he signed his retirement papers, was a Captain Amelia Carter. He paused. Any relation, ma'am? The blood drained from my face. I had completely forgotten. It was one of those strange coincidences of military life. For the last 6 months of my father's career, by a bizarre twist of assignments, I had been his company commander. I was a young captain then, in charge of a headquarters and headquarters company for the training brigade. He had been assigned to my company, on paper, as he went through the long, tedious process of medical out-processing and retirement. He was the senior NCO of the entire brigade, a sergeant major, and I was just a captain. He technically worked for the brigade commander, a full colonel, but for administrative purposes, for his evaluation report, his leave forms, the endless paperwork of a military career. His designated CO, the one who signed the forms. We had laughed about it. Him, a grizzled sergeant major, with 3 decades of service, having to salute his own daughter. He'd stand in front of my desk, a twinkle in his eye, and snap to a perfect position of attention. Captain Carter, Sergeant Major Carter, reporting as ordered. I'd flush with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. It was our little secret, a final, funny chapter in our shared military story. Yes, I said, my voice faint. That was me. I was his last CO. The warrant officer let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be. Ma'am, this changes things. According to Army Regulation 600-25, salutes, honors, and visits of courtesy, the presentation of the flag to the next of kin is a sacred duty. Normally, it's done by a representative from the honors detail. But in a case like this, where a former commanding officer is present and is also family, protocol dictates that you, as his final official commander in the United States Army, are the designated officer to make that presentation. I was speechless. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He wasn't finished. And ma'am, it's more than just custom. It's an honor. The eulogy delivered by the final CO is a cornerstone of a full honors funeral. It's the Army's final word on a soldier's service. It's not a request, it's part of the official proceedings. I sank down into one of Brenda's stiff, uncomfortable armchairs. My mind was reeling. A loophole, a beautiful, ironclad loophole woven from the very fabric of Army regulations and our own shared history. Brenda had told me I wasn't needed, but according to the United States Army, according to my father's own permanent record, I was not only needed, I was required. Major, are you still there? The warrant officer asked. Yes, I said, finding my voice. It was stronger now, clearer. Yes, I'm here. What happens next? I will be contacting the funeral home director immediately to inform him of the changes to the program, he said, his tone now carrying a new weight of authority. This is no longer a civilian service with military add-ons. This is a United States Army, full military honors funeral. We will provide a formal program, and I will personally be placing a call to the listed next of kin, Mrs. Brenda Carter, to inform her of the official honors in the sequence of events as dictated by military protocol. Don't you worry about a thing, Major. We've got it from here. You just focus on preparing your remarks. We'll see you at the cemetery. Be in your Class A uniform. When Brenda returned home an hour later, she was radiating a smug satisfaction. It's all set, she announced, to the room at large. A beautiful mahogany casket. The flowers will be lilies, nothing gaudy. Pastor Stevens is working on a lovely tribute. She looked at me, a flicker of something, triumph, in her eyes. I hope you're not too disappointed, Amelia. It's for the best. Before I could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, a slight frown on her face. Unknown number, she murmured, then answered with her professional lilting voice. Brenda Carter speaking. I watched her. I didn't move. I just watched. Her expression shifted slowly, like ice cracking on a pond. The smugness dissolved, replaced by confusion, then annoyance, then disbelief. Her perfectly manicured hand went to her throat. I don't understand, she said, into the phone. A full no. I told you people, we are not. What do you mean? Dictated by protocol. Her eyes, wide and furious, shot to me. In that instant she knew. She knew I had done something. The final eulogy, she spat into the phone, her voice a venomous whisper. By who? No. No. That is absolutely not happening. She is not. I am his wife. I am his next of kin. This is my husband's funeral. There was a pause as the warrant officer on the other end, I imagined, calmly explained the unassailable logic of military regulation. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of composure, began to crumble. The blood drained away, leaving a pale, mottled canvas of pure rage. She couldn't fight it. To publicly refuse military honors for a 30-year veteran would be an unthinkable act of disrespect. She would be ostracized. She was trapped. She hung up the phone without saying goodbye. her hand trembling. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The silence in the room was thick and heavy, charged with a decade and a half of resentment. "What did you do?" she finally hissed. I stood up, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt taller than her. I met her gaze, my own expression, calm and unreadable. I didn't need to gloat. The regulations had done the talking for me. I did my duty, I said. My voice, even, I ensured my father, Sergeant Major Thomas Carter, will receive the honors he earned, the honors he is entitled to. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, a venomous creature she had somehow allowed into her home. The war was over. I hadn't fired a single shot. I had simply followed the rules. And the rules had won. She was powerless to stop it. Hattie, I was going to speak at my father's funeral. I was going to honor him the right way, and I was going to do it in my dress uniform, a symbol of the legacy she had tried so desperately to bury. The day of the funeral was cold and gray, the sky a seamless, oppressive sheet of metal. It was fitting weather for a burial. As I got ready in my guest room, I laid out my Army service uniform, the dress blues, on the bed. Each piece was immaculate. Each piece was immaculate. The dark blue jacket, the lighter blue trousers, the crisp white shirt. I polished the brass on my belt buckle until it gleamed. I carefully pinned my ribbons to the jacket, each one a chapter of my own story, a story that had begun because of him. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw more than just a soldier. I saw his legacy, my bearing, my posture, the way I held my chin up. It was all him. For a moment, I felt a pang of intense sadness. He should be here to see this. But then a different thought took its place. He's here in the threads of this uniform, in the code of conduct I'm about to follow. When I walked downstairs, the house was full of Brenda's family and friends. A sea of black and gray civilian attire. They turned to look at me as I descended the stairs, and a hush fell over the room. Their chatter and murmurs died. They stared at my uniform, at the polished insignia, the colorful rack of ribbons on my chest. I saw confusion, awe, and in some cases, a dawning respect. I was no longer just the tragic, quiet daughter from out of town. I was an officer in the United States Army. I was a part of something they didn't understand, something that Brenda had clearly not prepared them for. Brenda stood by the fireplace, a statue of fury carved from ice. She was wearing an expensive black dress and a string of pearls. When she saw me, her lips thinned into a white, bloodless line. If looks could kill, I would have been reduced to a pile of ash on her pristine hardwood floor. Her brother David, a portly man in an ill-fitting suit, shuffled his feet and avoided my gaze. They knew they had been outmaneuvered, not by a petulant stepdaughter, but by the full weight and tradition of the institution my father had dedicated his life to. The drive to the cemetery was silent and tense. I rode in a separate car, a decision that felt both necessary and right. When we arrived, the scene took my breath away. Lined up on the manicured grass, near the open grave, was the honor guard. 7 soldiers, ramrod straight, their own dress uniforms, a perfect echo of mine. Their rifles were polished, their faces set in expressions of solemn duty. Master Sergeant Ray, the NCO with a detail, saw me and gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He had a kind, weathered face, a man who had seen many funerals like this, but his eyes held a particular warmth for me. He knew this wasn't just another ceremony. The civilian attendees, Brenda's crowd, seemed to shrink in the presence of such stark, disciplined pageantry. They stood in a loose, uncertain clump, whispering amongst themselves, looking intimidated by the formal military presence that had taken over what Brenda had intended to be her carefully curated event. The service began. The funeral home director, a man now completely deferential to Master Sergeant Ray, said a few brief, generic words. Brenda's pastor followed, speaking of a Tom I barely recognized, a man who enjoyed gardening and playing bridge. It was a nice tribute, but it was incomplete. It was a portrait with the heart cut out. Then came the military honors. The sharp, cracking retort of the 3 volleys salute from the firing party echoed across the cemetery, a sound that made several of Brenda's friends jump. It was a warrior's farewell, loud and unapologetic. Then the bugler, standing alone under a large oak tree, raised his instrument to his lips. The first haunting notes of taps began to drift through the cold air. That was when the tears I had been holding back finally came. It was a sound of profound loneliness and profound honor, the final lullaby for a soldier. Every soldier on that detail, myself included, rendered a slow, perfect salute. As the last note faded, the honor guard began to fold the American flag that had draped my father's casket. Their movements were a masterpiece of precision and grace. 13 crisp, deliberate folds, each one a silent prayer, until the flag was a tight, perfect triangle of blue and stars. Master Sergeant Reyes took the folded flag. He turned not to Brenda, but to face the assembled mourners. His voice was clear and strong, carrying across the silent grounds. On behalf of the United States Army and a grateful nation, he announced, "We honor the faithful service of Sergeant Major Thomas Carter." He then turned and walked directly to me. He stood before me, looked me in the eye, and presented the flag. "Major Carter," he said, his voice softer, but no less formal. "As his final commanding officer, the honor of the final eulogy and the presentation to the next of kin falls to you." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Brenda's face. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She had clearly assumed, despite the warrant officer's call, that she, as the widow, would be the central figure, the recipient of the flag on public display. But protocol was protocol. She was the next of kin, but I was the designated officer. The symbolism was devastating for her. The Army was giving its final honor to him through me. I accepted the flag. It was heavy, weighted with the history of a nation and the specific service of one great man. I held it in the crook of my left arm, just as I had been trained to do. I walked to the simple wooden lectern that had been set up. I looked out at the faces. My father's old Army buddies, men I hadn't seen in years, stood in a group, their old faces etched with grief and pride. I saw Brenda's family, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility, and I saw Brenda, her eyes burning holes into me, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I took a deep breath. I did not look at my notes. I looked at the casket. I spoke to my father. "My name is Major Amelia Carter." I began, my voice steady, carrying the authority of my rank, but the most important title I have ever held is that of daughter to Sergeant Major Thomas Carter. Some of you knew him as Tom, a husband, a friend, a neighbor, and you knew a good man. But I am here today to speak of the man I knew, the man the United States Army knew. I am here to speak about a soldier. A soldier's life is defined by discipline, by honor, and by a commitment to something larger than oneself. My father embodied these principles, not just in uniform, but in every aspect of his life. He taught me how to shoot, not for sport, but to respect the power and responsibility that comes with it. He taught me to navigate by the stars, not just as a survival skill, but as a metaphor, to always find my true north, my moral compass, no matter how dark the night gets. He didn't just teach me these things, he lived them. I paused, my eyes scanning the crowd. There is a story he once told me. He was a young staff sergeant in Panama. His platoon was tasked with securing a small village. Tensions were high. One of his privates, a scared kid barely 18, made a mistake and accidentally discharged his weapon. No one was hurt, but in that charged atmosphere, it could have sparked a riot. The company commander was furious, ready to throw the book at this kid, to ruin his career before it had even started. But my father stepped in. He stood in front of the captain and said, "Sir, the mistake was mine. I failed to properly check his weapon's status. The responsibility is mine." He took the official reprimand. He protected his soldier. He told me later, Amy, a leader's job is not to place blame. It's to take responsibility. You shield your people, you build them up. That's how you build a team. That's how you build trust. Tears were now openly streaming down the faces of his old comrades. They were nodding, remembering the NCO who had always had their backs. That was the essence of my father. I continued, my voice thick with emotion, but unwavering. He was a shield for others. He was a shield for me after my mother died. He was a shield for his country for 30 years. He believed that honor wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did, quietly without fanfare, especially when no one was looking. I finally turned my gaze directly to Brenda. Her face was pale, her expression frozen. My father was retired, it's true. He hung up his uniform. But you never stop being a soldier. It's etched into your soul. He was a sergeant major to the very end. And so it is fitting that he is laid to rest, not just as a husband or a friend, but as a warrior, with the full honors he so richly earned. He is not gone. He has simply been reassigned to the long line of heroes who stand watch over us all. I finished, the silence profound. I stepped away from the lectern, the heavy flag still secure in my arm. I walked across the grass, each step deliberate, my shoes silent on the damp earth. I walked directly to where Brenda was sitting in the front row. The final act of protocol. The one thing she could not refuse. I stopped before her. I went down on one knee, lowering myself so our eyes were level. She stared at me, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, humiliation, grief. She was trapped by tradition, by the public eye. She had to play her part. I held the flag out to her, the folded blue triangle of stars facing up. My voice was low, formal and clear, for her ears only, but reciting the words a nation required me to say. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your husband's honorable and faithful service. Her hand trembled as she reached out and took it from me. Her fingers brushed mine, and her skin was ice cold. Her eyes locked on mine, and in them, I saw her complete and utter defeat. She had tried to silence me, to write me out of our family's story. But in the end, I was the one who got to speak. I was the one who defined his legacy. I was the one who handed her the symbol of the very life she tried to erase. And I did it all without raising my voice, without an ounce of anger. I did it with honor. After the final prayer, as the cemetery groundskeepers began the solemn task of lowering the casket, the attendees began to disperse. They didn't flock to Brenda. Instead, a line formed in front of me. One by one, my father's old friends, men with crew cuts that had long since grayed and shoulders that still held a military squareness, came up to me. An old command sergeant major, with a chest full of his own ribbons, grasped my hand with both of his. "Major," he said, his voice thick and gravelly, "that was the finest eulogy I have ever heard. You did your father proud. He was the best of us. Thank you." Another man, one I recognized from the photos in my father's den, clapped me on the shoulder. "He talked about you all the time, you know. When you got your commission, he was walking on air for a month. He'd say, 'That's my Amy. She's gonna be a general someday.' Thank you for making sure he got the send-off he deserved." Each handshake, each shared memory, was a balm on my grieving soul. They weren't just comforting me, they were validating me. They were confirming that the father I knew, the soldier I had eulogized, was the real man. They saw him, they knew him, and they were grateful that his true legacy had been honored. Master Sergeant Reyes came over and gave me a simple, powerful nod. "Mission accomplished, ma'am," he said quietly, the words carrying a universe of meaning. Across the grass, I saw Brenda standing alone. Her family members hovered nearby, uncertain, casting furtive glances between her and the growing crowd around me. She was an island, isolated by her own bitterness, clutching the flag that now must have felt like a lead weight in her hands. The narrative she had so carefully constructed, of the quiet retiree who had left the army behind, of the devoted wife who knew him best, had been completely and publicly dismantled by the very institution she resented. Her friends from the bridge club and the real estate office looked uncomfortable, out of place, now realizing they had been invited to mourn a man they only knew on the surface. After a few more minutes, she could bear it no longer. She turned and walked stiffly towards her car, her brother and sister scurrying after her like nervous aides de camp. She didn't look back. There was no reception, no gathering at the house. The party she had planned was over before it began. As the crowd thinned, I found myself standing alone by the grave. The honor guard had departed, their duty done. It was just me, the flowers, and the freshly turned earth. The cold wind whipped a loose strand of hair across my face. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt a profound, quiet sense of peace. The anger that had been a hard knot in my chest had finally dissolved. The battle was over. Just as I was about to leave, a car I didn't recognize pulled up. A woman I vaguely recognized as Brenda's sister, Carol, got out. She approached me hesitantly. "Amelia," she said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to say, that was a beautiful speech." "Thank you," I said, wary. She's very upset," Carol continued, wringing her hands. "You have to understand. She loved your father very much. She saw his military life as the thing that took him away from her. Even before, she felt she was competing with a ghost. It was the classic, clumsy attempt at peacemaking, an explanation that was really an excuse. A few days ago, it might have worked on me. I might have felt a pang of guilt, but something inside me had fundamentally shifted. I understand that's how she felt," I said, my voice calm and firm. "But his service wasn't a ghost. It was half of his life. It was the foundation of who he was. You can't love someone and try to erase the best parts of them. He wasn't just her husband. He was my father, and he was a sergeant major in the United States Army. He deserved to be honored as all three." Carol stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She had clearly expected me to be more pliable, to accept the olive branch, and help smooth her sister's ruffled feathers. She was seeing the same thing everyone else had seen that day. A woman who would not be pushed around. She just wanted it to be a family affair. She mumbled, a last, weak defense. "It was a family affair," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "The Army was his family, too. They showed up for him today." "I'm sorry Brenda couldn't see that." I gave her a final polite nod and walked away, leaving her standing there by the grave. I didn't need her understanding or her sister's approval. I had done what was right by my father. I had fulfilled my duty, not just as an officer, but as his daughter. As I got in my car and drove away from the cemetery, I didn't look back. I was leaving Brenda and her bitterness behind me, a relic of a conflict that no longer had any power over me. I was free. 3 months passed. The sharp edges of grief began to soften, worn down by the rhythm of daily life and duty. I was back in Arizona, back in my office, back to leading my soldiers. I had packed up the few personal items Brenda had allowed me to take from the house, a handful of old photos, his favorite coffee mug, the box of his military memorabilia, from the attic, and created a small memorial on a bookshelf in my apartment. It was a place of honor, a quiet testament to the man he was. I hadn't spoken to Brenda since the funeral, and I felt no need to. The silence was a language we both understood perfectly. The house, his assets, it would all go to her, as his will dictated. I never cared about that. I had fought for his legacy, not his property, and I had won. One afternoon, a package arrived at my office. It was a sturdy cardboard mailer with a return address from Fort Benning. Inside, I found a large, framed photograph. It was from the funeral. The photo had been taken at the exact moment I was presenting the folded flag to Brenda. It captured the entire scene in stark, poignant detail. Me on one knee, in my pristine dress uniform, holding the flag out. Brenda, seated, her face a mask of shock and fury, forced to accept the tribute. In the background, The honor guards stood at attention, silent witnesses, and behind them all, my father's casket, a silent, central presence. Tucked into the frame was a handwritten note on official command stationery. It was from the brigade commander, the colonel who was technically my father's final boss. Major Carter, it read. Master Sergeant Reyes shared the story of your father's service and his funeral. I wanted you to have this. In this command, we have a saying, we leave no one behind, that applies on the battlefield, and it applies when we bring our heroes home for the last time. What you did took courage and character. You honored not only your father, but the very ideals we all serve. He would be immensely proud. Your father's legacy is in good hands, yours. With deepest respect, Colonel Davies, I held the frame, my throat tight. It was the ultimate validation. It wasn't just my own feelings, my own sense of right and wrong. It was recognition from the institution he loved, from his brothers and sisters in arms. They saw what I did, and they understood. A few weeks after that, I was conducting a routine training inspection. I was observing a young specialist, a woman barely 20 years old, as she instructed a new private on how to properly maintain his rifle. The private was fumbling, nervous under the gaze of an officer. The specialist was patient. She didn't mock him. She didn't lose her temper. She knelt down beside him. "It's okay," she said softly. "Let me show you again. My squad leader taught me. You take care of your weapon, and it will take care of you. It's about respect." Watching her, I saw a flicker of my father. I saw his patience, his belief in building people up instead of tearing them down. I saw his legacy, not as a static memory in a photograph, but as a living, breathing principle, being passed down through the ranks. After the training, I walked over to the specialist. "It's Specialist Miller," I said. "Good work today. You're a good teacher. You know how to lead." She flushed with pride. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm just passing on what I was taught. That's the most important thing a soldier can do," I told her, a genuine smile on my face. "Carry on." I walked away, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years. My father's spirit wasn't in a box in an attic, and it wasn't buried under 6 feet of Georgia clay. It was here, in the discipline of young soldiers, in the quiet transfer of knowledge, in the unwavering commitment to honor, and it was inside me. I no longer needed to fight for his legacy. I just needed to live it. The anger towards Brenda had faded into a distant, quiet pity. She had fought to control a memory, while I had fought to preserve a living ideal. She was left with a house full of silent, modern furniture. I was left with a purpose. So looking back on it all now, I've learned that family is a complex and often painful thing. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who fail you the most profoundly. But I've also learned that honor, true honor, is a force of nature. It can't be buried, or silenced, or packed away in an attic. It finds a way to shine through, sometimes in the most unexpected ways, using the very rules designed to uphold it. I didn't get the closure I wanted with my stepmother, but I got the closure I needed with my father. I honored him in a way only I could, and in doing so, I finally found my own peace. The greatest lesson my father ever taught me was that your value isn't determined by who acknowledges it. It's determined by your own actions, your own integrity, your own commitment to your principles. You won't be needed. Those words, meant to wound me, ultimately empowered me. They forced me to find another way, a better way, to prove my worth not to my stepmother, but to myself and to the memory of the man I loved. Thank you all for listening to my story. It means the world to be able to share it with you. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for a loved one's memory against family wishes? How did you navigate it? Sharing our experiences is how we build strength and community. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the face of adversity. Remember, family is defined by love and respect, not just by blood. And sometimes, the most important battles are the ones we fight for the honor of those who can no longer fight for themselves. Thank you for being here.